Chapter 12, Language Use. Here are some things that I need to clarify for the final exam. Read the chapter, okay? It talks about language. The first thing you need to know is that language creates reality. What does that mean? It's that language isn't objective. It doesn't just reflect reality. Language itself creates reality. Think about what wouldn't exist without language. Politics, values, arguments, a speech and debate team, your speech class, religion, lots of things wouldn't be possible without language. Another way to look at it is to think about this. When you don't have the word for something, what it really means is that you don't have the thought of it, because language and thought are completely linked. You think in words. Those of you who speak a language other than English, you might know what I'm getting at here. You might have a word in your original language where there is no English equivalent. That's because in the English-speaking culture, that idea or thing doesn't exist. One quick example is karoshi. It's a Japanese word that means a person worked him or herself to death. I just gave this lecture in class, and one of my students who's actually from Japan, she started nodding because she recognized the word. In English, we have to use a whole bunch of words to try to describe karoshi. A very healthy person worked so hard, so many long-hour days in a row that they just collapsed and died of overwork. We try our best to use as many words as possible, but it's not a thing here in the United States. We work pretty hard, but not like that. So Japan has their own word for it, karoshi. Think about the power that words have, since they can create reality. They can make something a thing. An example would be the word sexual harassment. You know, that word didn't used to exist. Women in the 50s, 60s, early 70s entering the workforce were trying to describe their experiences. They were saying things like, the men treat me different. They just ask me out on dates. They won't promote me. They won't listen to my ideas. They just keep asking me to get coffee. They think of me only as a secretary. They're trying to explain. Sometimes they inappropriately grab. They're trying to explain all these horrible things that are keeping them down career-wise. Finally, several court cases later, we have a word. It's called sexual harassment. In 2018, gosh, since decades ago actually, if you walk into an HR office at a corporation and you say, I'm experiencing sexual harassment, it's like a record scratch, like everything, files drop out, lawyers come out of the walls, people are held accountable. Now think about the power that phrase has as an accusation, okay, or as a way to create and acknowledge a reality, okay, so that word is powerful. That's what I mean. So as new words are created, they create new ideas and thoughts and experiences. Okay. That's what is meant by language creates reality. Since it can create reality, it can also alter reality. Okay. For example, and this is kind of sad, but language can be used to demean and even dehumanize an entire group of people. To dehumanize means to make a group of people sound like they're not really humans. Excuse the example, please, but for the sake of clarity, in World War II, we were fighting the Japanese, and they told our soldiers to go out there and kill as many Japs as you can, because it would be a lot harder to kill a young Japanese soldier, okay, or a Japanese young man, you know, that almost sounds like you're killing a person. So to say a slur, that's what racial and gender and ethnic slurs do. They dehumanize. They make it easier to hate an entire group of people. And you alone using the slur, yeah, you're just one person. You don't have that much power. But if lots of people say it and it's all around, then yeah, it really can demean that group of people in society. So be careful with how you wield your words, because that's considered very unethical to do, to demean an entire group of people. So since language creates reality and thought, language has the power to do that. Okay, in the beginning of the PowerPoint, right after that, is something called denotative and connotative language. You might have learned this before. Remember, D, dictionary definition. That's the literal definition. Connotative is what you need to worry about. The connotation is the other meanings associated with the word, like emotional meanings or historical baggage. Like, for example, the word retarded. Denotatively, in the dictionary, retard or retarded means delayed in development. That's what it means denotatively. But today in 2018, let's say your outline didn't look like what it was supposed to because it was delayed in its development because you had a lot going on. Would it be appropriate for me to say, oh, great start in your outline, but right now it's retarded? Okay, no, because the word retarded has a lot of negative connotations. It was used to describe a group of people who were developmentally delayed mentally, and then used as a playground insult and a slur, and then now a slur to demean that entire group. It's got all kinds of baggage. Okay, now some words have connotation that's subjective. Connotation can actually be positive or negative. Like the word feminist, is that a negative or a positive connotation? Depends on the audience. If I'm in one of my gender study classes and I walk in, I'm like, hey, I'm a feminist, I'm gonna get fist bumps. I'm like, oh, rock on, cool. You know, we're reading feminist authors. Ooh, yay, we love it. But to other audiences, if I say I'm a feminist, they're like, oh. They don't like it. It triggers negative emotions. So what emotions and thoughts are your words going to trigger? Okay, so be aware of the connotation of certain words. On that note, since language can create and alter reality, the book says avoid male generics. A male generic, that means when you use a male pronoun generically to include men and women. For example, the phrase you guys, which I know I'm guilty of. The phrase you guys says it's okay for women and men to all be in this category of guys. We can just call women guys. We can use it generically. Because notice in our culture, we can't do the opposite. It would be considered totally rude and offensive if I were to walk into my classroom and look at you all, men and women in the room, and say, hey gals, hey ladies, what's up? We just don't do that. We don't have female generics in our language. So the book says avoid it. Say you all or hey everyone instead of you guys. Instead of mankind, say humans or people. It's easier, clearer, and technically more accurate, okay? But linguistically, maleness is the default, okay? Oh, also, speaking of the gender stuff, the book says avoid stereotyping careers and jobs or roles by gender. What they mean is, let's say you know a man who's a nurse. You're not supposed to call him a male nurse. In 2018, the correct term for a male nurse is a nurse. If you have a female flying your plane, the correct term for a female pilot is a pilot. Okay, your mail carrier, okay, is not a male man. Mine literally is a woman. So they say mail carrier. It's usually more accurate, okay? Unless you are like the guy in Meet the Fuckers and you're against men being nurses, then continue to say things like, oh, a male nurse, because you'll constantly imply that it's a female's job and that that person really doesn't belong in it. You subconsciously imply that when you say male nurse. And if that's what you believe, you go ahead and use it. Like I said, language can create and sustain certain realities. All right. Oh, finally, the last tips for using language. Use language accurately, vividly, clearly, and appropriately. So accurately, make sure you're using the right word. I hear people all the time, even people on TV, use the wrong word. I asked one of my students, I said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, oh, I'm going to be a socialist. I was like, okay, sure. I usually don't hear that, but cool. What makes you say that? And she said, well, I really want to help kids in foster homes. I was like, oh, you want to be a social worker. Yeah, that's a different thing, social worker. So make sure you're picking the right words, especially before you speak publicly. Use language vividly. We did this in class. Remember I said use lots of vivid descriptive details, especially when you're telling stories. What did it look like? What did it smell like? What did it feel like? Remember when I told that story about the beach? Give it as much vivid detail as you can and practice that. And then finally, third, use language clearly. Don't be using a bunch of big technical words that your audience doesn't understand. They just won't understand you and they won't be impressed either. So use the clearest, most straightforward words as possible. And finally, use language appropriately. And that's what we already talked about when I suggested avoiding male generic he and not using slurs and things that abuse an entire group of people. All right, so that's your language lesson. You should get the rest of it just by reading the book. Everything else should be pretty clear on that. Good luck.